And as I'm going to show in this presentation, it's developing into a model. It wasn't a model to start with. To start with, it was just a few good ideas to try and get the economy going. But as time's gone on, it's sort of morphed organically almost into a model. And as part of the development of that model, there's a concern for sustainability, the environment, and dealing with the after effects of the pandemic and the coming climate emergency. So that's why I've titled this the Preston Model and the Circular Economy with a question mark. Very quickly, I'm going to give some backgrounds and reasons for the beginnings of the Preston Model then. This is well known to all, but it's worth just re-emphasizing the context since 2008, with vast amounts of money pumped into bailing out a financial system which was collapsing, austerity measures hitting communities in places like Preston and north of England very badly, especially the poorest, leading to high levels of inequality that we know about today. Investment and productivity being weak, bank lending low, and generally speaking, a lowering standard of living and crises of different kinds. And of course, it hasn't improved recently with COVID-19 and so on. So I think it's probably worth taking into account the kind of economy that led to 2008 and led to the reaction that produced the Preston model. So we're talking really about a linear economy. We're talking about a linear economy based on the idea of infinite growth. Recently this is being questioned by many different from many different perspectives, economic perspectives, but also perspectives based on social capital. The idea, for example, that economic growth undermines the need for community interdependence, and that even prosperity can actually corrode community by undermining our need for one another. So you can see that kind of thinking actually goes against the kind of thinking that we've inherited from, if you like, the extreme neoliberal interpretation of the economy. From Trebeck and Williams, influenced by the donut economy, I thought this kind of thing is always striking. Altogether, Britain's wastes a staggering 80 billion, sorry, I nearly said million, 80 billion a year on goods that are never used or used rarely. And all of this is to do with a kind of linear economy based on growth and profit making, with no attention paid to what happens at the end of that. An example of that is the inward investment, the failed inward investment that happened in Preston, called the Tithe Barn project, which in November 2011 was abandoned. So £700 million, and you can see here's a sort of a mock-up of what it would have looked like. My personal opinion is, thank God it didn't happen, because this would have destroyed the heritage and the centre of Preston. But nevertheless, based on thinking at the time, the idea of inward investment, the idea that John Lewis would come and open a massive store and that other stores would follow, and that this would regenerate the economy in the centre of Preston, was a pretty typical way of thinking in those days. But it actually failed. It didn't happen in 2011 for reasons we've already described, and it seemed to many people in Preston that maybe this was a systemic failure of traditional methods of urban regeneration. Basically, it left Preston with nothing, a total void and a desperate situation, where by years of planning and development of the Tithe Barn project had just collapsed in a matter of months, leaving very damaged spirits and an economy with apparently no hope, because there was not going to be any more inward investment. So the result of that could have been despair. It could have been, let's go and look for some more inward investment, or it could have been what actually happened, which was to think out of the box, because people suddenly started thinking in Preston, you know, actually, how much of the wealth generated by inward investment is retained by the local economy? When you have global corporations investing in a place like Preston, and in terms of the economy in England, it's all about big global corporations, often based in London and the southeast, investing money in, if you like, deprived areas such as Preston, and then of course that that wealth which is invested, a lot of it doesn't remain in the locality. A lot of it goes away to shareholders who have no interest in Preston, and in many cases don't even pay taxes in the UK, and that although some benefit is to be garnered from inward investment, those benefits are maybe not as great as people imagine. So in terms of, for example, of employment, the generation of new jobs, yes, maybe new jobs are generated by inward investment, but what kind of jobs are they? What sort of quality jobs are they? Do they adhere to the living wage? So all sorts of questions came up as a result of the demise of the inward investment project called the Tithe Bond project in Preston. And this then was when people, and in particular the council, the local city council, started to consider maybe there are other options, and started looking around the world at areas that seem to thrive but not depend on the inward investment model. Places, for example, like Mondragon, which is the biggest industrial worker-owned co-op conglomerate in the world. Places like Cleveland, where they've recently created the Evergreen cooperatives, which specifically cater to the demand of their local anchor institutions, in particular, for example, the local hospital. So in Cleveland, for example, they created a laundry, a cooperative laundry, to serve the hospital, so that the hospital didn't need to go elsewhere. They could have a service in Cleveland to supply their laundry for the hospital. Cincinnati, Co-op Cincy, very interesting developments there in terms of bringing in trade union participation into worker-owned co-ops, and very much using some of the governance models of Mondragon. So a variety of examples of different places around the world that seem to thrive using different kinds of models. So the University of Central Lancashire is an important player in a place like Preston. It's a big employer. It spends a lot of local money, but of course it's more than an anchor institution, in the sense that the university is involved obviously in procurement, and the more it procures locally, the more it's part of the Preston model in that sense. So in that sense, it's an anchor institution. But of course, the university is able to provide ideas, to conceptualize things, to create theories, to provide assessments and evaluations, to invite different ideas into Preston, which maybe other anchor institutions are not capable of doing, or wouldn't think of doing. So in 2013, we invited Michael Lithami from the Mondragon Cooperative Corporation to visit UCLan in Preston, and it was during his visit that the university developed a partnership with Preston City Council. That's where I met Councillor Matthew Brown, who's now the leader of the council, and things started developing together in that sense. People are very impressed by what happens in Mondragon. People are impressed by the scale. So in Mondragon you have 81,000 people in employment, with the vast majority of them in worker-owned cooperatives, and those worker-owned cooperatives are large-scale. In the main, they're large-scale industrial cooperatives. We're talking about factories that have 300, 400, 900, 1,000 worker-owned owners running these factories. And in recent years, in the last 10 to 15 years, they've also managed to expand their businesses around the world, as you can see, in more than 150 countries. Now, this is important in the sense that we've had to engage in a lot of education around cooperatives and worker-owned cooperatives, because what we found, and we did some research into this, what we found is that a lot of people had no idea what a cooperative was, had no idea what worker governance and democracy was in the workplace. And if they did think of cooperatives, they would think of things like the local co-op or the funeral service, or maybe the local organic vegan store down the road. The idea that you could actually create large-scale cooperatives, industrial cooperatives, which are owned by the workers, was a revelation to people, and very inspiring for pursuing the Preston model. So the university was funded by Preston City Council to begin a scoping process to try to understand if there was any potential for developing cooperative culture in Preston. As a result, I wrote this report with a colleague of mine. The report came up with recommendations for developing cooperatives in Preston, and one of the recommendations was to create the Preston Cooperative Development Network. So the Preston Cooperative Development Network was founded soon after the publication of the report. As you can see, full of older white males and one female, and we're working hard to overcome that and to create a different kind of atmosphere. But the Preston Cooperative Development Network was created in order to provide a network of cooperatives, so that in Preston the different worker-owned cooperatives could work together to support each other rather than to compete with each other. So of course, in terms of pure economics, it makes no difference if we're talking about a social enterprise, a small startup business, or a worker-owned cooperative. But in Preston, we want to do more than just provide a better economic situation. We're interested in the cooperative principles and values that come with creating a business that makes money, but a business that makes money in an ethical fashion and according to democratic principles and participation democracy, concerned with social value, equality, equity, and concerned with giving something back to the community. Furthermore, we hypothesized that a worker-owned business was more likely to retain wealth in the local economy, whereas a shareholder business eventually would have shareholders who are not necessarily concerned with Preston, and we'd get back to the old way of organising the economy. So that's one reason for creating the worker-owned cooperatives in Preston as part of the Preston model. So on the one hand, you have the development, and this is an ongoing process, the development of cooperatives, worker-owned cooperatives in Preston. And on the other hand, you have the change of attitude required or persuaded in the local anchor institutions. Anchor institutions are, well, in the picture here, you've got Lancashire County Council. So in Preston, you've got two councils. You've got the City Council and the County Council. The university is an anchor institution, as I've said before. You have the police force, you have the NHS, the local hospital, you have the Housing Association and Preston's College, Further Education College. So these different institutions were identified as anchor institutions. Anchor meaning they're rooted in the local area. They have an important interest in their role in the community, and most importantly, the word anchor actually indicates that come good times or bad times, those anchor institutions are going to remain in Preston, unlike John Lewis in the Tithe Barn project, who just would disappear when times are bad. These anchor institutions remain in the community, come what may. They are big spenders and they're big employers. So the more we could persuade them to spend money locally, the more money would be generated locally, and the more that money would be retained in the local economy. So that was the idea, and that idea has come to pass. So between 2012 and 2017, the anchors in Preston relocated an additional £539 million into the local economy in Preston. So for a town like Preston, well, we call it a city, which is about 120,000 people, the relocation of £539 million is a significant achievement. And it's all been done only by changing anchor institution procurement habits, asking anchor institutions to pay attention to social value, and asking them how they could generate and retain local wealth, how they could provide quality living wage employment, and develop a sense of being a good neighbour, develop a sense of being part of the community and giving value to social capital as well as to financial capital. And further, more evidence of things going well in Preston from that point of view. There's high economic activity. There's a high employment rate. Business density is higher in Lancashire than elsewhere, and there's a growth in new jobs being provided in Preston. And we have to remember that this is in the context of the northwest of England, which is struggling, and many areas around Preston are struggling to a far greater extent than Preston itself. Now, it's very difficult to evaluate exactly to what extent we have a cause and effect in the Preston model, whether improvements in Preston are directly related to the Preston model or not. We can't actually say yes, it's a cause and effect process. However, it is unlikely that it's a mere coincidence, I think, that PricewaterhouseCoopers independently have assessed Preston in 2019, 18, 21, consistently over the last 5 or 6 years as being a good growth place, a high performing place, a most improved city place. And these are just 3 examples. There are other examples of defining Preston as being a place of well-being and happiness, and so on and so forth. So it does seem that something is going on in Preston, and very likely that something is related to the community wealth building project known as the Preston model. Now, when we began work with the anchor institutions, and we began meeting executives and procurement officers and finance officers in the various anchor institutions, you know, it wasn't all fair sailing. A lot of people were either indifferent or in opposition to what was being suggested. And some people thought, for example, that we'd be acting against the law, that it was illegal, that it was some form of protectionism. But in fact, when we dug a little deeper into what could be legally and ethically done in Preston, we found that procurement laws are based on values above 180k for goods and above £4 million for works. In other words, the small businesses that have benefited from increased contracts with local anchor institutions are not businesses that work on values above 180k. So that's hasn't been an issue. And the 2012 Social Value Act has very interesting. I mean, in those days, of course, it was important that it was consistent with EU procurement rules. So in a way, I suppose there's less of a restriction now. But even then, the Social Value Act allows for the application of a weighting system, which scores a number of other criteria as well as price. And that is and has been an essential aspect of giving more business to local businesses, because what local anchor institutions have been asked to do, for example, and what they've been doing is they've been reducing the size of their contracts from huge major contracts, which nobody in Preston could compete with the corporates, the global corporates, to smaller contracts. So, for example, instead of a massive estates contract, which only a massive global corporation could do, an anchor institution might, for example, say, well, we have a contract for mending the windows and doors. That's all. That's what that tender is. It's mending windows and doors. And by having that kind of contract, the local businesses are able to compete with the larger businesses. And not only that, they're probably able to compete more aggressively than the larger corporations. So chopping up the contracts into smaller chunks has been an important aspect of doing this. And in terms of social value, an example of the criteria that would be used would be, if you won this contract, what would be your carbon footprint? Well, naturally, if you have a small fleet of vans in the local Preston area, your carbon footprint is far reduced compared to the carbon footprint of a global corporation ferrying stuff from London or from Brussels, or even flying stuff over into Manchester Airport, and so on and so forth. So reducing your carbon footprint would be a social value criteria which could be applied in the competitive tendering. Another example would be, if you won this contract, how many new quality local jobs could you provide? Well, a global corporation might be able to provide new jobs, but they might not be local and they might not be quality. They might be zero contract jobs, and they might not adhere to the living wage. Whereas local jobs, especially if they're jobs connected to worker-owned cooperatives, are much more likely to be quality jobs, and jobs that are again remaining and belonging to the local economy and to the local communities in Preston. And in the end, the anchor institutions themselves, the executives or the workers in anchor institutions, have come round to seeing the Preston model as being something really rather motivational and rather interesting, giving meaning and agency to the work they do. In other words, if you can see that your local neighbours are benefiting from your work as an anchor institution, then that's a feel-good feeling. And here's some quotations from some research we've done in Preston from 3 different anchor institutions. Since an individual employment status, living conditions and income impact their health as much as accessibility and quality of healthcare do, the Preston model, conceptualizing economic growth in a more holistic quality way of life, is really important. And another anchor institution, most people here are proud of the model and want to do a great job for Preston communities. They're not in this in order to drive shareholder value. And a third anchor institution, it's fantastic sharing good practice for our community to be part of this effort. As someone born in Preston, it's been great. And I think you can see there how inspirational and motivational it is to be involved in this kind of thing. And this goes back to what I was talking about when I was discussing the value of worker-owned cooperatives. It's not just about the money, it's about people finding a meaning for their lives and enjoying the sensations, for example, of being proud of living in a place like Preston, of understanding what they can offer to their neighbours and their communities. So, as I said at the beginning, the Preston model didn't begin as a model. In fact, nobody in Preston ever called it a model. It was something that the media picked up. I think it was The Guardian suddenly called it the Preston model. But as time's gone on, the university, in conjunction with all the different shareholders in Preston, has been able to develop the different strands of contributions into something that looks a little bit like a model. So this is, I think, what it looks like today, something along these lines. So, of course, in the centre of it all, you have the city of Preston. And going clockwise from the top, you have the anchor institutions we've just been talking about. You have the Preston Cooperative Development Network, very much connected to anchor institutions and procurement, because if it ever comes to pass, and it has been suggested to us, that an anchor institution says, look, that's it, we can no longer buy locally because there's no more business locally to sell this or that. So, for example, office furniture. We've seen that the supply of office furniture is not something that you can buy in Preston. So the idea is that once we identify the gaps in the local economy, such as, for example, office furniture, eventually we can create worker-owned cooperatives that can precisely plug that gap in the local economy. So maybe one day in Preston we'll see that worker-owned cooperative that provides office supplies, office furniture, which can supply, for example, the University of Central Lancashire. So that's how those are connected. Then you have Preston City Council. Preston City Council, it's a great example of how, despite austerity, and Preston City Council has been one of the hardest hit local authorities in the United Kingdom, every year more and more money has been taken away from the budget for Preston City Council. But of course, what Preston City Council have, which you can never take away from them, is an enthusiasm for Preston and a knowledge on the ground. And it's the enthusiasm and the knowledge on the ground, obviously with support from stakeholders, such as, for example, CLES, the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, the university, etc. It's that kind of thing that has been able to transform procurement habits with anchor institutions with no investment at all, absolutely none. The only reason that the wealth has come to Preston is because the anchor institutions have simply changed their habits. Nobody has actually put in very much money into this at all. So the council can provide knowledge, expertise, and motivation and enthusiasm to make things move, even if it hasn't got much in terms of budget. As I mentioned before, the University of Central Lancashire, it is one of the anchor institutions, but as I mentioned before, it's more than an anchor institution in the sense that it provides, for example, it provides students who graduate and who can use their graduation skills to further develop the economy in Preston. Maybe some of them could be part of designing new worker-owned cooperatives. And of course, the university also works to create social innovation in terms of ideas, concepts, theories, etc. We have the development of the Preston Cooperative Education Centre, which was created this year in 2021 in conjunction with the Cooperative College in Manchester. The idea is that one day the Preston Cooperative Education Centre would become part of the Federation of Cooperative University nationwide. The idea behind the PCEC is that, and this we've learned for sure, is that you can't expect people to change their minds immediately and to develop ideas out of the blue. They need a kind of education to do that. So people will go to the PCEC, Preston Cooperative Education Centre, and they will learn about cooperation. Those skills are transferable skills, but also they'll learn about cooperatives, create cooperatives, and contribute to the local economy. And finally, we have the Northwest Mutual Community and Cooperative Bank, created in conjunction with Liverpool and Wirral councils, and that's now registered with the FCA, and we're hoping that within 12, 16, 18 months from now, the first branch of that bank will open in Preston. And the idea behind the bank is that we know that the high street banks won't provide important loans to local businesses, startup businesses, and in particular, they're reluctant to provide loans to cooperative businesses. So in order to do that, we're creating a bank, the Northwest Mutual Community and Cooperative Bank in Preston. So taking on board the idea of the circular economy, recently we've been thinking a little bit about the donut model, Kate Raworth's donut model, which, as most of you maybe will know, consists of two rings, the rings of the donut. The inner ring, which is the social foundation, which is the necessary minimum for people to feel that they're living a decent life. And the outer ring is the environmental ceiling, the ecological ceiling, beyond which we're entering in environmental disaster. So you have to maintain the social foundation, but you also have to maintain the environmental foundation. You can't have one without the other. That's the idea, basic idea behind the donut model. And what we found was actually a lot of these things: voice, education, income, resilience, a lot of these things, health, a lot of these things are actually the Preston model. So we're working towards the idea that the central part, the social foundation of Kate Raworth's donut model could actually be the Preston model. And the Preston model works to cooperative values and principles, and these things are, if you like, circular in themselves. You don't go from one to the other. You don't go from cooperation to ownership, or from ownership to equality, or from education to social transformation. These things are happening, if you like, in in an instantaneous way, all interlinked at once. And these things are the social and also economic, and we find it difficult to separate social and economic in community wealth building. Foundation of the Preston model: ownership, cooperation, equity, equality, education, employment, and social transformation eventually. So it's possible, I think, to talk about the social value basis of a circular financial economy. So if you look at the outer circle, the blue lines, you have the local worker-owned cooperative business, or maybe just a business that's not a worker cooperative. It makes and produces, on the top right, it makes and produces stuff. It generates wealth by making and selling things. It creates local profit and local investment as opposed to inward investment, the investment created on site. This money, this generated wealth, is spent locally, and the success of that leads to the creation of local quality job creation. And that is a circular process which does not rely on grants and does not rely on inward investment. And within that, you have the connection to community. So when you have, for example, quality local job creation, then in community you get more local engagement, improved community relationships, you get pride of place, you get happiness and well-being, and agency and empowerment. And these things feed each other all the time in a circular and interacting fashion. So two of the aspects of the Preston model that are in development right now are the Preston Cooperative Education Centre, as I mentioned before, and the Northwest Mutual Community and Cooperative Bank. And both of these ideas come from the Mondragon system in the Basque Country in the north of Spain. Here is a statue in Mondragon in the Basque Country of the founder of the cooperatives in Mondragon, a guy called Jose Maria Arizmendiarreta, who says, it has been said that cooperativism is an economic movement that uses educational action, while the definition could also be altered to affirm that it's an educational movement that uses economic action. So what Arizmendiarreta meant by that, and what is still today an essential aspect of work in Mondragon, is the value and importance of education. And that social value, commitment to community projects, and the development of democracy, participatory democracy, and governance by workers is something that you can't take for granted, that there's a constant educational process at work to make that happen. And in fact, in Mondragon, they've recently revived this idea, and they're putting more emphasis on education because now they have a new generation of cooperative workers, a younger generation, who don't necessarily accept the values of the previous generation. So education is an essential part of this whole project. And ideas of banking in Mondragon, the local bank, we have our local bank coming up. The local bank in Mondragon is called Laboral Cucha, and this is my friend and colleague Oscar Muguerza, who's the finance director for business development. And Oscar works as a mentor for new businesses. In other words, the bank doesn't stand back and simply provide accounts and money. The bank in Mondragon actually proactively participates in the development of businesses, and they do it with that kind of local social value in mind. As he says, for example, fundamental, each and every one of us, you have to think about where we buy, what we buy. The ideal would be to buy something from Gipuzkoa, which is where the Mondragon region, or somewhere close. Whatever we spend close by, we're bound for the benefit of all. Not only true of everyday consumer, this is important. This is a whole part of the Mondragon success story. It's not just every consumer, but also to companies. They have to find providers close by. It's not just for the local butcher or fishmonger. So that's the point. In Mondragon, it's about big businesses, but also for banking and supermarkets, for all. We have to value what we have, the local. So we take on board very much the lessons of Mondragon, and we're in the process of developing a 4-year strategy to put into action some of the work that we commissioned from Mondragon. So we have had, well, we were supposed to have people visiting, but it's been online for obvious reasons. We've had online consultation training from Mondragon Consultancy, and we're in the process of digesting their information and putting that information into practice, into an ecosystem design. They provided 2 reports for us, which are the foundations of a 4-year strategy. So what are the learning outcomes for us, I think? There are lots of learning outcomes, and the learning is an ongoing thing, but I think we can safely say that these are important. So in order to engage with community wealth building on the scale of the Preston model, there's a need for specialist change makers. For example, this could be the Centre for Local Economic Strategy, CLERS, or it could be a university. And these specialist change makers can help to join the dots and to create solutions. They can provide evidence for change, and they can contribute to the very subtle behavioural and cultural changes that are necessary in terms of education and training. There needs to be a political or at least a strategic and community buy-in in order to bring that local community expertise and knowledge and commitment into the policies of the Preston model or any community wealth building project. There has to be an understanding that it's more than just economics, that procurement can drive social change, cultures can change, and that's an important part of making a success of such a model. It's important to create networks. The idea behind networks is that people help each other as opposed to compete with each other. So when, for example, a worker-owned business is created, the idea is that it doesn't compete with another business, but it works in conjunction to the mutual benefit of businesses to provide for the local economy, which is basically a vision based on cooperation and the idea of participatory democracy, as opposed to simply representational democracy. And here are some of the data. Here's some of the data we've got from talking to people in Preston. People feel they have an enhanced positive identification. They have feelings of allegiance to the core values of the Preston model. They have a positive self-perception, and they support the aspirations of the Preston model. They understand that the Preston model can be positively viewed from outside Preston, and that people suddenly are interested in a place like Preston. They do express profound feelings about the social and emotional value of the Preston model for the community, and the very people at the top of the anchor institutions appreciate the enhanced voice they have and the participation they can engage with local actors and the general social and civic participation in Preston. So thank you for listening. There are 2 publications, 2 books for anyone who's interested in pursuing this. So Matthew Brown, who's the leader of Preston City Council, has published this Paint Your Town Red book, which is a sort of cookbook, if you like, a sort of how to pursue a community wealth building project such as the Preston model. It's a very practical kind of edition. And the one on the right is my own publication with my colleague Philip Wyman, which is a bit more of an academic and more conceptual and theoretical approach to the Preston model. So 2 different approaches to the same thing. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you very much. we'd certainly see ourselves within Cake as one of the change makers that you quote there. So that's what we're trying to do really in establishing the circular economy innovation community. And we're trying to bring people together from across the region, from public services and third sector actually, to start to have these conversations and develop some common practice in terms of how to engage with users, both within and across the regions, in order to develop solutions to some key challenges around circular economy in this respect, but the process of forming those communities of practice across the region, we very much hope fits with your idea and what Preston have done around bringing people together in order to develop solutions and then build. So the chat's been really busy. We've had quite a lot of questions. So my colleague Andrew has been monitoring that. So Andrew, would you like to throw some of the questions that have been put to Julian?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Gary. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Julian, for that wonderful insight into what's going on in Preston. You'll appreciate that some of these questions were posted a little earlier on, and you've actually answered the question as you proceeded through your presentation, but I'm going to put them to you anyway, because you may want to say something in addition. The first one is coming from Phil, and he says, can we quantify how much this impacts on health and well-being and the additional value of social values created?
Well, actually, that's a great question, because I've just begun a 3-year NIHR funded project precisely on the public health impact of the Preston model, and we're working with all the relevant stakeholders and communities in Preston, of course, closely with the National Health Service and Preston's hospital to try and assess to what extent these different ways of working have positively affected the health indicators in Preston. And the hospital is very interested in this because the hospital has a hunch that social value work and social prescribing work can significantly reduce the beds that are used in the hospital. I mean, it's quite a pragmatic, practical thing for the NHS. So our hypothesis, if you like, is yes, that public health has improved in Preston as a result of the Preston model. But of course, that's it's part of ongoing research. So I'll come back to that question in 3 years' time.
Good academic response there.
Thanks very much, Julian. Another question here from Julian, which relates to the challenges around procurement and contracts. And it reads, if we let long-term contracts values quickly aggregate into significant amounts, so the limits are still very relevant. Short-term contracts build in increased tender costs and uncertainty. How does Preston deal with contract lengths? I know that's a bit of a technical one for you, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, yeah, I'm afraid it is a bit technical for me, I'm afraid, because I'm not directly involved in that kind of detail. My only answer to that is that, of course, the procurement officers and the finance officers in the anchor institutions, I mean, they're not gifting these things to the community. They are simply changing the criteria for winning contracts. They're not, they're not providing charity. This is they're still they've still got their finance officer hats on, and there's no way they could be seen to give dodgy contracts or short-term contracts that aren't going anywhere to people just because they live in Preston or just because they have a business in Preston. So I suppose, and of course, you know, I'm not there. I'm not an expert. I'm not a procurement officer. But what I'm supposing is that the finance officers are people who have their feet on the ground, and that questions related to short-term, long-term contracts, quality, value for money, as well as social value, are uppermost in their minds all the time. All they've done is they've given local businesses a fair shot, whereas before local businesses just couldn't compete.
Thanks very much, Julian. It's quite interesting because within the circular economy lens, when we look, for example, at the NHS in Wales, 60% of the carbon footprint is actually related to procurement, and so there's a similar challenge there, I guess. It's how we encourage these anchor institutions to weight their procurement processes to take account of social value, health, and of course climate change, which is on everybody's agenda at the moment. But thanks for that, yeah. Julian.
Well, one of the principal benefits of introducing social value criteria into anchor institution tendering and procurement is precisely to reduce the carbon footprints. It doesn't, you know, it's not rocket science to understand that the more local the services, the less carbon footprint you have.
Thanks, Julian. This question, I think you may well have dealt with towards the end of your presentation, but Phil is asking regarding evaluation, what do the people of Preston feel about it?
Well, you know, I have to be honest here. Some people in Preston, I mean, quite a few people in Preston have never heard of the Preston model. OK, so I mean, I don't want to give you a false impression here. You know, lots of people get on with their lives and they don't want to think about things like the Preston model and local procurement, and they don't want to think about cooperatives either. So I mean, you know, there's quite a lot of people who are you know, ignorant of what's happening in terms of being able to pin it down on the Preston model. But the interesting thing is that the well-being index for Preston is really very high, and it in a sense it doesn't matter, does it? It doesn't matter if Joe Bloggs in Preston you know, associates her feeling better with the Preston model or not. The fact is that a lot of people in Preston, even if they're ignorant of the Preston model, feel that Preston's a good place to live. And they like it, and they enjoy being part of community, and we often get very positive responses. Now, some of the responses, the ones I have on my presentations, make a specific link between their positive feelings and the Preston model. But I would say it's just as valuable if they don't make that link at all, you know, because it's a bit like PricewaterhouseCoopers evaluations. It's very difficult to put your finger on cause and effect. It really is. But, you know, it would be weird, wouldn't it, if people were feeling positive well-being, and if things were happening in a positive sort of way in Preston, it had nothing to do with the model. It would be a bit odd, I think.
Thanks very much, Julian. And I guess that this last question, really, you touched upon it already, perhaps more of a statement. It would be interesting to know how this model is being seen through the lens of the climate and nature emergencies with COP26 looming. So,
yes, well, I mean, this is obviously a big question. I think it's fair to say that when the Preston model began, when it all started, it was a bit of a sort of panic, knee-jerk reaction to the failure of the Tithe Barn project. There was no fancy idea about linking it to decarbonisation or circular economies or green economies or donut economies or any of that stuff. You know, it was simply, my God, what are we going to do now? You know, it really was. And it's only through working at it over the years and adding little bits, you know. So we began, for example, with in changing local procurement habits for anchor institutions. The council began doing it, so that's just one anchor institution, and then they brought in the housing association because they used to own the houses that the housing association now owns. The housing association brought in Preston's College because they have an interest in their tenants receiving a certain education, and so it kind of grew organically like that. And then, because the university invited someone from Mondragon over, suddenly someone thought, well, hey, what about worker-owned cooperatives? You know, what's the value of worker-owned cooperatives? And so it kind of developed in that kind of higgledy-piggledy way. And eventually someone from the Guardian or something says, oh, it's the Preston model. So we thought, oh, well, we better get a model out, you know, and then they sort of started to sort of create a sort of thing that looks like a model. But now we're much more conceptualizing the whole thing. And there, I am with a colleague of mine. We have a PCAN funded project that is actually looking at post-pandemic climate aware development of the Preston model. So that's now becoming part of it, as I demonstrated by the idea that the Preston model could be in the middle of Kate Raworth's donut economy model. So it is now becoming part of that. And by the way, very interested in your work on the circular economy in terms of incorporating that as well.
Well, that Venn diagram certainly seems to be developing nicely there. And I'm looking at the time, it's coming up to 12:30. Thanks very much for that, Julian. I'll hand back to Gary just for a final word before concluding.
Yes, thanks, Andrew, and huge thanks to you, Julian, and the incredible honesty. If you were a marketer, you'd have said it was all in the grand plan to start with. But yeah, absolutely wonderful presentation. Huge links with what we're trying to do within the CAKE programme, the Circular Economy Innovation Communities. In essence, I think we're trying to build from more from the bottom up, but giving the opportunity to people, to change makers, if they want to think of themselves as that, and that isn't a grand title. People can join the CAKE programme if they're interested in driving the circular economy agenda in Wales and working with other people from across the region to drive that agenda. And for us, and the reason we call the programme the Innovation Community is, as you suggested in your presentation, the networks are the important part. The people that do want to make change and do want to drive the circular economy agenda, coming together, developing a common narrative, developing some common tools and techniques, but importantly, becoming critical friends and providing support. And then we hope that these networks will grow from there and drive the kind of the model that you've successfully done in Preston. So I am conscious of time. Thanks very much, Julian. Thank you everyone for coming. Julian, are you happy for us to share this presentation through the website?
Yeah.
That's wonderful, thank you. And I think we've been recording, so you happy for us to put that recording out?
Yep.
That's wonderful, thank you. And I'm talking with Julian and his colleagues, so we are trying to develop and see where the similarities are. As mentioned, we'll get this presentation onto the website with some audio if we can get the two things to line up. And I'm sure much people far more talented than me in the team can get that done. So thanks very much for attending. Visit CAKE at CAKE Wales is the Twitter handle, and go to our website to find the presentation. Thanks very much for attending.